G'day listeners and welcome back to another episode of the Keeper League podcast. We're the AFL Fantasy Podcast. It doesn't talk about the superstars. We only talk about the lesser knowns and the players that are going to bring value to your draft and Keeper League teams. My name's Hef and I'm joined by my co-hosts Kays and Doss. How you going, boys?
Going well, mate.
Yeah, how are you? Not too bad. Kays, how are you?
I'm not sure I want Doss in the studio.
Why
I'm
not?
not used to this.
Oh, yeah, we finally got you in the room
The
for
contract,
the same room.
I'm still
slot.
want to iron it out, but
Well, we've kind of confirmed, unless you're like, if you're watching the stream and you're running really fast from one side to the other, that you're not the same person. So it's kind of good to know that, you actually both exist in your own entirety.
Are you sure you're not just a bit grumpy because of this beautiful portrait that you can see?
Actually, can we
right
swap it so I
behind?
can look at Ben Keys all night and I have to look at shit Pat Dow?
As we walked in, Doss gave Petty Dow a bit of a smooch on the wall
That's
as
my
he
boy.
came in,
It's
saying
right
a bit of a tap there. So it was
That's
pretty
definitely
happy.
not COVID safe.
For those who are listening and not watching from on the stream, we've kind of revamped the studio. We've put some frame posters up, frame photographs up. So we've got Paddy Dow on the wall now. We've got my boy Andrew Brayshaw and the big bad Ben Keys in the back corner behind Kays. So yeah, a few people are watching and people are enjoying those as well. But anyway, I guess we've had a pretty big week. We put out a big resource this week, didn't we? Well,
you did.
I did.
And you put your face front and center on it just to make sure everyone knew that as well.
The thing is, like, you can't put just a spreadsheet as the cover photo. You need something in there. So I just
Maybe like a football player or something like that?
the guy that made it, the guy responsible for this great
Big
fantasy
Hollywood
resource.
hair.
That's the one.
Front and center.
That's the one. So that's what's in there. And anyway, that's not important because there's no picture of me in the spreadsheet. All right, there's just stats and data. Basically, just get on the website and have a look at it. There's so much stuff in there. There's points per minute, player ages.
It is a great spready.
Player ages, so you can check out for your keeper leagues when they're worth drafting, season splits, points per minute numbers, kick-in numbers, CBA numbers for every player, all in one spot, so you can just access it, do your rankings in there, and you'll dominate your draft for sure. So definitely check that out.
I liked
available to gold and silver members.
Oh,
yes.
Make sure you put that
Yes.
in. I always like putting, sorting the graphs and giving them a little color grade too.
Yes.
Do you do that with your little graphs on your own, when your spreadsheets, when you're all by yourself with your spreadsheet, you and your spreadsheet? Just
No, I don't spend that much time on the spreadsheets. To be honest, I don't do a lot of ranking outside of pod stuff. I don't really get a lot of time to do it, but I will this year. I'm going to have a big crack and I'm definitely going to use that spreadsheet to kind of get my ranks sorted. So yeah, it's going to work pretty well. I don't know about the color coding, Dossie. I'm not that fancy, but
it's nice. You get to see which one's red and green and it's beautiful.
All right, I'll add a few colours in just to make you happy. All right.
Thanks, mate.
Another piece of big news during the week, boys. I used my Lawnmower 4.0. So I don't know if you actually want to hear about this, but I was genuinely impressed with this thing. Kays is looking a bit sus, but geez, it's a close shave. It's the closest you'll get, I reckon, without a razor, I think. And real gentle around the nipples too. So for those who need to shave their chest, did not take the ends off, so that's good. They're still there, still intact, so that's good. And also, I worked out what the ball toner is actually for. It's essentially, it's aftershave for your balls. So how you get razor burn and stuff from shaving? So the ball toner does the same thing for your balls. So
what do you reckon,
Kays? I haven't quite explored it. I got the weed whacker out during the week, and that was quite good.
Actually, yeah,
I was breathing a lot better after that.
Yeah, use mine too. I reckon you can just take in more oxygen after you use it.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to need that for the big nossies, big dossies. He'll need the weed whacker ASAP.
That's right, mate. There's on the table behind you. There's a few Manscaped t-shirts there for you as well. I've got mine on tonight, but forgot to give that to you last week, Kays. But there's a Manscaped t-shirt there. But support for the Keeper League podcast is brought to you by Manscaped, who is the best in men's below-the-waist grooming. Manscaped offers precision-engineered tools for your family jewels. They recently launched the Ultimate Men's Hygiene Bundle, the Performance Package. We all got sent one of those, and they are absolutely fantastic. So join over 4 million men worldwide who trust Manscaped with this exclusive offer just for you. You get 20% off and free shipping worldwide with the code KEEPER20 at manscaped.com. So that's about 8 million balls out there using Manscaped. So make sure you're part of the Manscaped revolution, I guess. Anyway, have we had enough talking about balls, guys? Or anything else you want to add about that?
You seem to be incredibly comfortable talking about balls.
We've all got them. Well, all blokes got them. Half the people in the world have got them. It's nothing to be ashamed of.
To be honest, man, I've just had a kid, so my personal grooming isn't probably up to its normal standards. So once we get back into working life, I might take it up.
Take it for a test drive.
Totally understand that, mate. But you can use it on your face too. It's just depends. Nah, we won't go there. Anyway, if you want to get involved, there's a link in the description to the Manscaped website. The code's there as well, so check that out. All right, I'm sick of talking about balls. Let's get into some players. First up, lads, it is Port Adelaide. Apologies if I ramble for a good 45 minutes just on this one team.
This show doc's like, 12 pages long, and there's 8 of them are Port.
You need some new material, mate.
I'm not lying.
There's like 30 dot points for each player.
Do you know what I did this time around? Instead of doing my dot points before writing the article, I wrote the article and put it through a dot point converter into the show doc. How's that for time efficiency? So that's why there's so many dot points. I didn't actually write on them. Anyway.
This is usually the point where I have a bit of a nap, Dossie. So
yeah, I might join you on that one. Mate.
Oh, you haven't made that joke before either. All right, let's get started. All right, first player I'm going to talk about is Zach Butters. So surely it's breakout time for Zach Butters. In his third year of football last year, he regressed slightly on his 2020 average of 77.8, which was a BCV score, obviously. But he finished the year last year with an average of 76.2. However, there are a couple of factors that contributed to this average, okay? So he began the year in the midfield mix for Port Adelaide, averaging 21% of the centre bounce attendances and scored 79, 119 and 58 AFL fantasy points. Now, round 4 was the biggie because this was the first time he was basically used at every centre bounce, okay? He was having an absolute blinder before suffering an Achilles injury halfway through the match. He left the field after 83 points, at halftime, after scoring 83 points, scoring at a points per minute rate of 1.22. So if we apply this points per minute stat to his average time on ground for the rounds prior, okay, from the rounds prior,
what is this?
He would have scored 116 points in that game, okay, which means he would have been on an average of 93 heading into round 5. Okay, so he could have very well gone for this for the rest of the season, all right? But unfortunately, he missed the next 3 months of football, okay?
This is like Dos saying Paddy Dale would have been amazing if he was good at football.
He was on 86 when he got injured. Even if I don't use that, he's still averaging 80 at this point, all right? He's still quite good.
I do remember that game, though, that you're talking about, that one game, because he was in my team in pretty much every format.
And how good was it?
It was amazing.
Yeah.
That halftime, to go down at halftime when it seemed like the moment that he was.
This was like his breakout right there in this moment.
Like you're saying, he literally was at every centre bounce essentially, which is not what he'd been doing the previous rounds as well.
Correct. So anyway, he only returned in round 17 and he was only used at 18% of the CBAs for the remainder of the season with some low time on ground in those games as well, just easing back into it. He finished off the season playing 8 out of the last 10 games, but only averaged 69.8 throughout this period, despite putting up a couple of decent scores in the 90s. So obviously the time off with injuries, that kind of affected him a bit and he just couldn't return to the midfield in the same capacity before and obviously score the fantasy points before getting injured. By all reports, though, he's been training with the midfield again in 2022 this preseason. He's back to full fitness, has the potential to be a premium forward in 2022 given his likely role in the midfield, and he's listed as a forward. The issue is he'll lose forward status, so factor this into your equations when you're drafting him, but I reckon it's time for Zach Butters. What do you boys reckon?
Yeah, I'm on board. I don't know how big the breakout's going to be, but yeah, I can see it happening, especially if like we're suggesting that the midfield comes. It's pretty obvious, especially just given, I know it's such a small sample size, but you know, the game that we did see was super impressive when he went in there. He's been talked up to go in there, and with forward status this year especially, it's going to be juicy.
Is it he who's got the big pipes this pre-season too?
There's a lot of big pipes out there.
Butters.
I think it was.
Wouldn't have thought.
I think it was. Didn't Rosie have some decent pipes?
It was Rosie.
Yeah, Rosie had some
Rosie's
decent pipes in
got
his pictures.
monumental pipes.
Yeah, Dossie loves his pipe watch. Should get that hashtag going actually.
Yeah, I have to.
Anything more to add? It's a pretty obvious one, isn't it?
Is he 2G for Pete? Like, I know he's not technically, but like no one's trading him, no one's delisting him,
right.
no one's.
It's more for people. It's more for people.
We're talking startups.
More people that's starting up. Yeah. So it's like, do you draft him as a forward, or do you hold on? Do you think he's going to be a premium midfielder next year because he's going to lose his forward status most likely? It's the kind of, you got to think about where you're actually going to be drafting, and that's the sort of reasoning why we have him in there to think about it. I reckon if you are drafting for the future, you are probably dropping him back a little bit because you're taking him as what do you reckon he averages as a midfielder this year?
I think he can go 90 plus.
Yeah.
I just don't know how high.
So that puts him in the M5 kind of range.
In the Schoenberg range.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, in that kind of range. So it does drop him down the rankings a little bit, but if you kind of want to have a crack straight up, you definitely jump on him this year. Let's move on. There's too much time about Zach Butters. He's a pretty obvious one. This one's kind of obvious as well, but this is kind of Rosie we're talking about. So we've been waiting for Rosie to break out for some time now, and I guess we're wondering if 2022 is finally the year. After being drafted at pick 5 in 2018, burst onto the scene in his first year of footy, debuted round 1, played all 22 games that year. The live wire forward averaged 72.6 in his first season, which included 2 100 plus scores and 3 other scores in the 90s. He looked like he had the youngster He looked like he had the world at his feet. And some members of the media, very, very important members, incredible members, such as Kane Corns, said he would have gone ahead of Sam Walsh as pick number 1 in the draft. So that's how big a raps he had after his first season. But things haven't gone to plan since then. He was hampered by a foot niggle for the best part of the next 2 seasons. He played 33 out of 40 games still, but we probably have seen his progression stunted a little bit. So after 2019, he looked like a sure thing in the midfield because he's got such good awareness and ball use, but we haven't really seen him used in the midfield yet, which has been a bit of a concern. So last year he was only used at 11.3% of centre bounces for Port, which was the 11th ranked player at Port Adelaide. So that's how low down he was. But again, he's another one that's been reported to be training with the midfield all pre-season. And if that's the case, we should see a scoring bump. Again, he's listed as a forward, so this is probably the transition year that you want to own him in. The issue is, I think he's still too valuable for Port up forward, considering Fantasia's injured, Robbie Gray is getting pretty old. So I think it might not be as much of a breakout as some people are expecting, but I think the positive in that is going to keep forward status at the end of that. What do you think, Case?
Someone's got to kick goals.
Yeah.
So is it him?
I think it is. Yeah.
So it's almost like, I don't know. Like someone like an Isaac Heaney or something like that who, I don't know, Heaney has also had some injury issues, but like he's a guy who has had to play forward because they need that kind of a player up forward, or, like when Sydney had Mills back, or, there's always examples of potentially good quality players who have had to bide their time a bit longer than normal up forward or up back purely because the team needs them there.
Yeah.
And I kind of feel that Rosie's stuck in that little zone at the moment, and potentially he needs, Boak to kind of go so that there's that proper genuine midfield spot vacant.
I don't know if he needs to wait for Boak. I'm just like looking at their top centre bounce guys, and if he's fit and firing, is he bringing more to that midfield than like a Willem Drew or a Robbie Gray? Now we're talking about Robbie Gray aging. Does he move forward more this year? Does Amon just play a bit more out? I think that there's a spot for both Butters and Rosie this year. I'm pretty high on him actually taking a big bump if all reports are correct, and he has had he has an injury uninterrupted pre-season.
Yeah, I'm not concerned about Butters. It's more so just, do Port need someone like Rosie up forward to kick goals? That's all it comes down to.
I don't know if they do. Don't they? They have enough big guys up there. I reckon there's a few young forwards coming through as well that could potentially do the role.
The thing with Port is they rely on bringing the ball to ground and either locking it in or jumping on the contested footy and then going from there. So it's like working around the stoppages. So yeah, it's a tricky one.
Yeah, smaller kind of guys. So listed just as forwards from Port. Butters, Gray, getting on. Dixon's injured. Who knows where Power Pepper's at? Motlop's almost done.
Yep.
Fantasia's injured. Then you've got Schofield, McEntee. All these
it gets
untried guys. Kane Farrell, who is probably the next
Dylan
one
Williams,
in line.
the smallest tank I've ever seen on any AFL player ever. But
the thing that I just want to come back to those, I reckon you were there as well, and this was when Rosie was touted to have a monster breakout season. Pre-season game, I reckon that's where one of the first times I'd come and met you with like Louis and those guys.
Yeah.
Rosie was in the midfield the whole time, and we were like, this guy's going to win the Brownlow. He's that impactful when he's in there and he's fit and firing.
Playing against his own team though.
Well, I'm just saying though, he was like the best on the ground.
He was good,
and it's like that's his upside, and I still see that in him. It's not like it's gone away. He's just been injured and forced to play forward when he's unhealthy.
Yeah, I don't know. I think he's just been too valuable as a forward. That's my personal opinion. I still think he has stints in the midfield. Don't get me wrong. I just don't think it's a full-time midfield. I think it's a pretty even split between the two, and just might not reach the heights that some people are expecting.
I'm interested this year how the split goes, and it will probably increase as, like you guys said, the aging midfield gets older.
Yeah, I know what you mean. All right, we'll move on. Spending too much time on Port players, as per usual. Xavier Dursma. So he's my next one. Pretty obvious ones, these three. So these were the three that were taken in the draft, I guess, 4 years ago now. But same. Dursma was taking the same draft as those two. Still hasn't broken out. So there's 3 players that haven't broken out from this year in the super draft. So that's a bit concerning for Port Adelaide. But look, Dursma was quiet in round 1 last year, scoring 53 against North Melbourne, but then went on a decent run, averaging 92 from his next 3 games. Then he was another one who injured his knee in that same game as Butters in round 4 and missed the next 3 months worth of football. So he returned to footy in round 19 and played every game for the remainder of the year. But yeah, he was quiet, just coming back from the serious injury, I guess. Did put up a good performance in the qualifying final versus Geelong, where he notched up 11 kicks, 13 handballs, 7 marks, 4 tackles for 97 fantasy points, and that was his best score of the year. He averaged 72.1 points for the year, but if he didn't get injured and miss so much, he was averaging big in the first 4 rounds, or apart from the first week he went down, but he was in the 80s in the first 4 rounds. I think he could have gone around the 80 to 85 mark if that injury didn't keep him out for 3 months. And I think he can go around the 80 to 85 level in 2022. The issue with he's an outside player, and I think they just have lower fantasy numbers because they don't have the contested game that some of the better midfielders do, and you can't go inside and outside and get stats from both ways. But I think the ceiling for Dursma is around a 90 average in a couple of years' time, once he develops a little bit further. This would make him a pretty suitable M5, M6 around that range. But yeah, might take a couple of years to get there. But I don't mind Dursma. What do you think, Dossie?
Yeah, I really like him. I'm just concerned with the amount of soft tissues we've seen at such a young age. But yeah, when he's fit and out in the park, he's awesome. He's one of these guys that can just build a score with his marking and kicking just constantly out on that wing.
Yeah,
I think the emergence of a guy like Bergman, for instance, and the fact they've still got aim on, it's like, where do you play all these guys? And I think there's talk of even Bergman, maybe even himself, going a bit more inside to open up because Dursma's just too good on the outside. But yeah, I think you're right. That sort of range is pretty good. Just hopefully he doesn't get injured this year.
It's unlike Port to have too many of the same type of players in one side. But anyway, he's just another one there. So Dursma is another one we think is going to break out. Now we're getting probably to the less obvious ones. Willem Drew is the next one. So many people are super high on Willem Drew this year, but I'm not 100% sold. So in 2022, he had his best season in terms of fitness, playing all 22 regular season games. I think he also had his best average as well. But he also played finals for Port Adelaide as well, and he didn't play since 2019. So it's a pretty good return for someone who was out for so long. His style of play as a midfielder, he's quite contested, often goes head-to-head with some of the best players in the comp in a bid to shut them down or just make them accountable at the very least. As a result, he ranked second across the competition for tackles and fifth for tackles per game. This contributed to his average of 75.5. But the stat that stands out for Willem Drew is his last 5-game average. So he averaged 80 to finish off the season. This was boosted by a score of 101 against the Crows, which was a low-scoring, dour and wet affair, which just played perfectly to his style. So big score there that kind of boosted him up. And yeah, I think that 80 average would look really good if he was a younger player, but he's a player for a guy that was still developing, I guess, but he's been in the system 6 years as well. I know he hasn't played a lot of footy due to injuries, but he is a bit of a more senior player when you compare him to some other youngsters in the competition who played around a similar amount of games. Also, if you add in his finals campaign, that last 5 average turns into a 71.8. So he seems to have his contested style down pat, but I'm just not sure where he boosts his scoring in his game from there. He's not a big possession getter, doesn't really have an outside game. For those reasons, I'm just not as hot on Willem Drew as many other coaches are. I do think around that, an average around the 80 is possible, but midfielders who average 80 are just so easy to come by in drafts. So I know. All I'm saying is just don't get too hyped up on Willem Drew. Don't think he's going to be a breakout or anything like that. I think he's kind of at his ceiling already, and don't go too early on him, I think. What do you reckon, Case?
It's a bit of a stopgap last year.
Yeah.
He played a role. He's a bit of a role player in there.
Yeah.
That's my kind of gut take. If they ever actually do want to inject some of these youngsters in there, he's probably one who makes way. The tough thing is he's also the guy who probably does the unrewarded shit, do the blocks, lays the tackles, and you kind of need someone to do that. Whereas, you want your Rosies, your Dursmas, etc., to be the ones who are, flary ball winners. If you look at the Bulldogs midfield or even the D's midfield, the 2 grand finalists from last year, Libet always is the one who's doing the unsexy stuff.
Or very similar.
Jack Viney. So there's always someone like that in that midfield mix. So there's always a bit of safety in drafting him, that that he's always going to be maybe mid cover maybe or an M7 or something like that. But I do kind of tend to agree with you that it might be he might have reached his kind of potential in terms of scoring. I suppose the only guy who I have got potentially stealing that spot is someone like a Sam Pepper if he can actually get his shit together.
Yeah, I don't really see that happening, to be honest. And when he does come in, he's been playing more forward as well. And he's been actually quite effective in that role. So I'm not sure if he does steal that midfield time. You got any opinions on him, Dos?
I think it does just depend on if, what we're talking about, whether they're going to sacrifice a guy like Drew's midfield time, or they're just going to start moving, Gray up forward and Poke a little bit more on the outside. Because if they are serious about increasing their rotations, bringing in Butters, Rosie, whoever else, if Bergman, if they're going to actually run through there, then somebody's got to give. And if it's Drew, then there's no point even thinking about him as an option at all.
Yeah. All right. We'll move on to the next player. You mentioned it before, Dossie. That's Miles Bergman. Sucks this guy lost DPP status this year. In 2021, he was a mid-forward, so pretty handy swingman for the coaches that drafted him out there. He was drafted with pick 14 in 2019. Didn't play a game in 2020 in his first season, but he debuted in round 1 last year, playing across the half-back line for Port Adelaide. Started a little slow. Just guess it's to be expected by a player just easing into his first year of senior level. But as the season progressed, he eventually found a home on the wing and put up some reasonable scores from time to time. He averaged 64.4 for the season, which looks low, but if you look at his late season numbers, you'll find some value here. He averaged 71.6 from his last 5 regular season games and 79.7 from his last 3. He also averaged 73 from his 2 finals games in 2022. So these numbers would look great if he was still listed as a mid or a defender, but he's unfortunately he's a midfielder only due to all the time he spent on the wing. Now, I watched this wing rotation really closely this year, and it was so weird. It wasn't weird. It was like Carl Amon would go start on the wing, go into the guts, then Bergman would come up, and then it was basically essentially Dursma and Bergman playing, and then when one of them go off, they'd swap back on the wings. It was like a wing rotation, but they'd rest on the wings, or Carl Amon would rest on the wing. It was kind of a bit weird. I'm not really sure how this affects him, because I think Port can play 3 wingers because they roll Carl Amon through the middle. Yeah. So I think they kind of still can kind of play all 3 of those guys on the side. Depends who else comes into the side as well, because most of the time you're finding Dursma and Bergman lining up on the wings. You were saying that he might go inside a little bit, but
there's talk of him going inside. Now, I think he's also just coming off in off-season. He did have surgery. Had a minor shoulder.
Yeah, that's right.
I don't know if it was major or minor, but he's apparently training, I think, back at training now, which is great news. But I think, turn the cameras on. Where's the camera? I think Miles Bergman is the most underrated young star in the competition.
Oh, another one of Dossie's big calls. I think
he's the season that he just had and how composed that he is with the football. At 20, 21 years old, I'm not surprised that they're talking about getting him involved on the inside, because this guy's a star, I think. And I think, especially given the names that they've got at Port, he goes under the radar. And last year, that was a really exceptional season for someone that, hadn't played at AFL level before. And I reckon it was incredibly underrated.
Yeah, I'm at the point actually with my keepers. Do I keep someone like Miles Bergman or Nick Blakey in my side? It's really tough to actually kind of narrow it down to those last 2.
Bergman.
Yeah, I don't know, without the DPP. Yeah, I don't know. Nick Blakey, we'll talk about next week, but geez,
talk about no tank.
He had an impressive, I don't know, he did a bit of gut running. He had an impressive end of last season, but we'll talk about that next week when we talk about Sydney. But anyway, we'll move on from this one. I think Miles Bergman, though, I wouldn't be surprised if he does get DPP at some stage in his career again, because he's just such a versatile player that you can play him in so many different roles. So that's what I like about him. But yeah, I don't know. I've seen him stuck as a midfielder for a bit of time.
I did a short list of guys on my bus.
Yeah, okay.
Really? I still haven't made one. I think you guys were talking about how many we get, and I think I managed to narrow it down to about 50. No, but I think not including guys that are now considered 2G for P. I think Bergman cracks my top 5.
Okay.
So
wow, that's
love
cool.
Miles Bergman.
Yeah, right. I can't have Bergman on my bus even though he's on my team. So
he's mine.
That's fine. You claim it. I'm not a big bus man anyway. I'm more of like a station wagon. I'll just have 4 people in there. That's fine. We'll drive behind the bus and it'll be less rowdy, I reckon.
Dossie's coach, my minibus and have
tricycle. We'll crank indie tunes and just kind of stay away from the riffraff. Anyway, Trenton Mont's last player I want to talk about. 2021 was a pretty tough year for Dumont. After back-to-back calf injuries at the start of the year, he missed the first 2 months of the season, only fronting up for his first game of the year in round 9. He played every game for the rest of the season though, but obviously just wasn't up to his usual standard after missing so much footy. From 14 games, he averaged 70.3 points with only 100 plus score and 3 other scores above 80. This was his worst return in fantasy since his first year of footy in 2015. And to add insult to injury, he was delisted by North Melbourne at the end of the season, or in the off season last year. So this is we're talking our friend of the show, guy who was on the show last year,
Froggy
Trenton Mont.
When's he coming back on the show?
No good. We'll have to talk about
waiting
that.
for guests. Dossie's come on board and no one wants to come on anymore.
No, it's been hard
there
because
may be a reason for that.
Yeah, I know.
Keezy last year.
It's been hard because we haven't all been in the room. Like, we've got some Crows guests lined up, but Kays wasn't here for so long. Didn't make sense to not do them on the Crows podcast. So just stay tuned. We'll see how we go.
There's going to be some good content coming up between
in the pre-Amy series filler week.
Any Gold Coast guests coming on?
Maybe. We'll have to wait and see. But we'll just have to wait and see. But anyway, let's rewind a few years, all right? So Dumont was looking like becoming a fantasy superstar at the end of 2018. He completed his 4th year of football, putting up some monster scores. His average from his last 5 games in that year was 104, which included a monster score in 139 in round 23 to bring home the flag for many fantasy coaches out there. I had him in a league as well, and I think I had Seb Ross captain that week, but I wish I had Dumont captain that week because it would have gone even bigger. 2019 ended up being a transition year for Dumont. When he was putting up those big numbers in 2018, he was playing a lot of inside. He moved onto the outside, onto a winger, and kind of found a home there. He said on the podcast last year it wasn't his suited usual game, but he adapted to it quite well and felt like he could run all day on that wing, so he was pretty happy with that. The fantasy trajectory didn't continue, but he did manage to average 88.1 that following year playing on the wing, and then that's a 98 BCV. So yeah, despite moving to that wing, it didn't really hinder him too much. Well, fast forward to today, Trenton Mont finds himself at Port Adelaide, but whispers from our sources, Kays might have spent a bit of time with an ex-player who's a current coach at Port Adelaide in the off-season, telling us that he's probably only a backup option at this stage. But I'm holding on to hope for Trenton Mont for a few reasons, all right? So firstly, Port Adelaide does have a bit of a lack of midfield depth in terms of experience, okay? So we were pretty exposed in the preliminary final. We just could not do anything about the Bulldogs midfield because our younger players could go in there. I think Robbie Gray was our number 1 attended midfielder in there because he was the only one who probably could, show the experience to go with these players. We kind of backed away from the kids and things like that. So I've got a little bit of hope there. I think they also showed that Boak and Wines just couldn't perform. We couldn't perform if they guys weren't at the top of the game or those guys were taken out of the game. We were basically screwed. I think the experience of Dumont does come into play here. I think if we're planning to play some unproven midfielders like Butters and Rosie, that guys that haven't really played through there a lot, if this fails to deliver, I think that's when we see Dumont start to feature after that. So maybe not early in the season, but I think if the youngsters don't shine, he comes in after that. There's also a few injury concerns to Port Adelaide that are a factor. So Willem Drew, Zach Butters, Connor Rosie, they don't have the best track record with injuries. So if any of those guys fall, I reckon he's the first one in. Travis Boak's also 34 this year. That body's not going to hold up forever. So it might take a few dominoes to fall, but I reckon there could be a place for Dumont in 2022. And if he does, he could make a decent option later in the season as like a waiver pickup or something like that. But as an owner, right now, I'm probably not keeping him, but he's a player I'm looking to redraft at the right price. Right. Dossie, you're looking at me a bit shifty.
Oh, no, I'm glad you got through all 30 of those dot points on that one there for Trent Dumont. Probably goes undrafted.
Probably longer than the Trent Dumont interview last year.
Probably goes in as a COVID replacement.
Actually, that's not true because Trent Dumont spent an hour on the phone talking to us, so we had to cut that one down.
I'm sure he's a nice, great bloke.
Yeah.
I think he's probably just there for depth, but we've just talked about all the midfielders that they've got. You make a case for why they need some experience in there, and if the thing that Ken Hinkley, he revived Trent McKenzie's career, for instance.
Yeah.
So I'm not putting it past him to be able to do that with another player. If he finds a role, that'd be great. I just I wouldn't draft him, or I'd just be watching him on the wire in case he does get a game. But,
I'm in the same ilk there. All right, note to self, let's not just read your article for your podcast notes. Let's actually make them smaller, shorter, sharper and shiny for future. But it's Port Adelaide, so I can get away with talking a bit longer.
And that's enough for tonight, guys. We'll see you next week.
Thanks very much.
Now let's get on to Richmond. All right, moving on to the Tigers. Not the best year for them last year after coming off a pretty handy 4 years. Who's got Richmond, boys?
Yep, that's me.
Let's do it, Dossie.
Talking some Richmond. And not the most fantasy-friendly team as we know, but what do you guys, before we get into it, Kays, do you reckon in the next couple of years we're going to see not just a shifting of the guard in terms of players, which hopefully some of these players eventually become fantasy relevant. Mm-hmm. Do you think they're going to ever change this game style that's obviously winning them flags, has won them flags in the past, but not conducive to fantasy scores?
It's a great question, Doss. I'm glad you asked, and it's no surprise you asked me because you haven't read my DT Talk article today where I actually go into all of this in detail.
I haven't, no. Please explain.
But no, I spoke about Jack Graham, who you're not speaking about tonight because he's kind of too G4P.
Yeah,
but
he just snuck over the too good for the podcast.
Yeah,
yes.
it's I think they have to. because you're looking at guys like obviously Hooley retired last year. Riewoldt at the end. You think Cochin's at the end. Edwards is at the end. They're a core nucleus of what that team has been, or that they've made that team great over a long period of time. But there's no real natural replacements for some of these midfielders. Like Dusty's 31, I think. Meatball Presti is 30 this year. So apart from Shai Bolton and probably Jack Graham, there's no one.
And Thompson Dow.
But he hasn't unproven. I'm saying proven or guys who've actually played, I should say. But I think they have to, because they're going to have to change something up, because they can't go playing that same structure because they've got all these new guys in there that potentially can't do it.
I don't know. I just think, depending on what they go with the coaching going forward as well, but it seems like they're just drafting the same types to fit in. They kind of draft to a system. They don't draft... Well, they do draft based on talent as well, but you know what I mean? They draft based on talent and to fit in their system.
Yep.
So I'm like, if they keep drafting to fit in their system, we're probably just going to see the same system that's not fantasy friendly.
The thing with Richmond, apart from Dusty, there's not a lot of out-and-out superstars in that team. That's how good that system is.
Yeah.
If you take a lot of those players out and put them in other teams, they might not be as good without that type of system. So I don't see them changing too much because they're such a system-reliant team. Under Hardwick, I tend to think they're going to go roll it again.
But you can't say that the guys who have won flags aren't talented.
They are
the guys who are coming through as talented as those guys who are potentially generational in a way.
When you look at all Australians, Brownlows, I guess you got Dusty, it's I don't know. They just don't seem like they are the most talented team in the competition, but they're just most well-drilled.
I don't know.
They are the most talented at the skill set that they need to play that system, which is,
Okay, they're talented at being Richmond.
Fantasy-wise, though.
all they need to do.
Fantasy-wise, though, Jaden Short was their leading scorer for
I think fantasy is a good indicator, to be honest.
Yep.
So let's get into
scary.
some great fantasy scorers for this season. But no, we'll have a look at 6 players, and I'm going to be talking firstly about Daniel Rioli, who is pretty exciting from a keeper league perspective because he's got that forward status this year. He's a forward defender, which is pretty rare and beautiful.
Love that.
So obviously going to be playing him forward this year, but it's the switch to defence that's actually good for our on-field scoring. So playing as that forward and wingman across his entire career, basically, he's now 24, and he managed to sneak into a backline role in that later part of the season when Richmond were kind of struggling to find form, trying to find a new identity, and he managed to find a slot in the backline, and he averaged 78 fantasy points in his final 5 games of the season, including 80 in his last 3, so slightly bumping up. I think where the upside is as well is he's got a little bit more upside in that kick-in department. I don't know if he's going to be the guy that takes them, but over the last couple of games, he did take a couple of kick-ins. Now, the percentages are kind of skewed. I think it's 20% of the kick-ins. It was basically 1 or 2 kick-ins. It's not a huge amount, but I think he will sneak a couple of +3s cheekily as well, which, could see him average in that 75 to 80. I'd probably see him as a 75 to 80. But the fact that was his first time playing in that role, obviously coming up from the VFL and playing that a little bit as well, I don't know. He's a really tempting option, especially with that forward status. And now the retirement of Basher Hooley as well. There's that extra little bit of juice there. Either of you guys both keen on Rioli this season? I think it's kind of he's just got 20 points upside, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. Given that forward status, the end of the last season was the promising kind of factor in that. I don't see him being a huge average type player, but I can see him being a really handy. Well, sorry, he'll score a D5, which probably makes him an F4. You know what I mean? So that's the way I see it. And I've got him in one league, and he was actually steak knives in a deal I did, and I had no intention of keeping him, but now I'm actually going to end up keeping him because that forward status is just so handy.
The issue I have with someone like Rioli is you banged on about Richmond's system and people fitting into that system. If you look back over the last kind of 3 or 4 years, Basher Hooley's been the big point winner and the major ball user out of there. Jaden Short's always been the 2IC of that kind of role, right? So Basher Hooley was smashing it. Now we've seen he leave, Jaden Short jumped into that role. So we saw basically Jaden Short jump from a 73 average to a 93 average, taking Hooley's role. If Rioli's coming in and playing old Jaden Short's role, he's only going to be a 70 average defender.
On Short, though, I see that he was still developing in that time as well, whereas Rioli's been around for a fair while. So it's
numbers don't lie. He's 76, 70, 72.
Yeah, but how many seasons?
But they coexisted. Last year, Hooley played 12 games still last year.
Yeah,
and they
for a bit, but I don't think that Rioli's ever going to be as good as
Oh,
Short.
no, sorry.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah,
I'm not
think
saying that.
either.
I'm saying,
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be.
I think 80 is probably like the higher end of his output.
I'm saying I don't think Short's 70s were a direct result of Hooley. It's more that he was still developing young player coming through. He's kind of broken out now, and that's where it's at
Jaden
more
Short's
so.
26. He's not that young.
What's that?
Jaden Short's 26.
Oh, I feel like he's younger than that. Oh, no, but he didn't play like a lot early on, did he?
I'm keen to have a look at Rioli, but I don't think I'm getting too carried away with an 80. I think I'm talking more 70, 75.
Yeah.
Which is still fine for a forward this year.
Yeah, that's
for a guy
right.
that's got
Yeah, that's all I
back
think.
forward.
That's all
I'd
think
love
as
a
well.
75. That's probably where I
That's where I'm
wanted
at.
to score. And like I said, I think a lot of drafters will be switched on, but hopefully in your league they're not. He's got that average of 56 sitting next to his name. You might be able to kind of if you slip him up your pre-ranks, you might be able to sneak him on draft night. All right, let's talk about Liam Baker, who is also defender eligible, not the forward, but he's just a guy that I've kind of liked over the years. Just like the way he goes about it, and he's got that ratty mullet. He just gets around, but I think I misidentified him as being observably thirsty. Probably not so much that, just really hard attacking at it. Kind of like your Ned McHenry, the way you like he goes about it at the Crows. He's very similar in that. I think who was that player that I wish I remembered? There was a player that he was going back and forth with last year, and it was like a real head-to-head duel, him and Baker and someone else. I can't
remember.
Anyway, it was
a
great duel, and they were yapping back and forth. But anyway, he started the season in his usual post in the back pocket, changed roles several times last year, which is why I think he kind of didn't have that consistency in his scoring. But at the end of the year, he kind of played as that. He had a couple of games where he played as an inside midfielder, which that was obviously juicy, but kind of moved out of it and into a forward line role. He ended up forward, yeah. Yeah, so he played like every position basically.
Yeah.
Where he plays this year is going to depend on how keen I am to draft him.
Yeah.
But the fact he did get a run in the centre bounces at one stage looked really good. So in his top centre bounce attendance game, 62%. He had 33 disposals, 3 marks, 6 tackles, 118 AFL fantasy points. Could he be that guy? I probably don't think. I'm probably hoping.
We've got to factor in that there was a lot of injuries in that Tigers midfield last year.
And that's the reason he got in. But the fact he did get in there, only a few games. Unfortunately, I think he'll be
feel like
playing
once
forward.
they kind of knew they're out of contention, they were just trying shit. Like,
But what is he? What do you actually think Liam Baker is?
Forward.
But take away what club he plays at. Like if you could inject him into any club to play the role that he's born to play, what do you reckon he is?
The player that I think he is, and this is a mild version, and it could just be due to stature and like feisty kind of nature, but I see him as the ultralight version of like a Rory Laird, because Rory Laird played those start of his seasons as a backman. He could find the pill, kind of like we've seen Baker do over the years, not to the extent of Laird, obviously, but like I said, ultralight,
and then ultralight, and then
maybe. I could see him as that midfielder, but I just think the Tigers' game style, like we said, just doesn't allow it. So
can't see it.
I probably see him more so playing forward, and that's why I'm kind of wary. But
I'm just saying, I see him playing forward too.
There's something about him though.
I know.
We need to see Oracle's best 22.
He's in the best 22, rightio. I'll let you know the best 22.
Don't give the whole 22, but where does he sit?
I've actually got him on a half-back flank.
Okay. There we go.
All right.
So the back line for Richmond would be Grimes, Tarrant, Rioli, Baker, Bolter and Short.
Don't mind that.
I thought he was going to read the whole thing out then. That's right.
I'm kind of keen for him still. I still have faith, put it that way. All right, I'll move on to Nick Vlosten, who, we've talked about Rioli benefiting from the departure of Hooley. I think the guy that's going to absolutely explode this year, though. So we're talking, you and I both are on the same page, Kaz. We probably think Rioli's going, 70 to 80, and 80 being the very upper end. Vlosten, I think, is the guy that's going to take his game from being, he's borderline 2G for P right now. He's on that 76 kind of cusp. So I think the roughly 2G for P this year is around 79 to 80 kind of points. He's just below that. But with 10 games without Hooley last year, Vlosten averaged 85 points. So that's a plus 13 differential with him out of the side. But the big thing was, it wasn't just Hooley out of the side. It was at around round 11. So we're talking about the Richmond trying to find their identity. They kind of moved to a more kick-in dynamic where it's like whoever's closest to the ball, let's just get it in kind of thing. And Vlosten actually benefited massively. So from round 11, that shift kind of occurred, and Vlosten started gaining a bump in his kicking usage. And, there started being a little bit of red hair back there, sort of trying to get into the kick-in involvement. And, he started getting around 40%, I think it was. So I'll just look. So from round 1 to 10, Vlosten played 4 games, which isn't many, but he took an average of 4% of the kick-ins from round 1 to 10. So 4 games, 4%. After that, he took 44% of the kick-ins from round 11. So that's 40% up. So, and he averaged 89 fantasy points in that stretch. So that's some pretty big upside. And he also finished the year hot. Yeah, 92 in his last 5, 101 in his last 3. I just think he's probably the guy that we're looking at to take it up to premium level defender, and you're going to probably get him as a bargain. He's not a sexy name.
Not people are going to I wouldn't have even considered him. I didn't even notice his scoring until you pointed it out in the rankings podcast the other way. And the more I look at it, and then I've gone back and watched a few highlights, and I'm a bit hot on it, Dossie. I think you're onto something here.
And he's kind of in that prime age too. I think he's only
27.
Like 27. So. Yeah.
Can a guy at 27 go from being a
70 average every year?
70 average every year?
You're the one that talked about it. Bashahuli over these years. He's had that, that dominant nature in the back
kicking
line.
numbers are the big ones.
Yeah.
And who
if he
gets
can maintain
them is going to
them,
be interesting.
I think they love Jade and short kicking out.
44% from round 11 to the end of the season.
Yeah. If they're trying to move the ball on quickly from defence, that might be the catalyst as to why they're just kind of kicking on whoever's closest. And if he's deep in defence, then you're probably going to get a few. I don't know. Yeah.
I'm a big fan. I think my defender rankings pod the other week sort of highlighted. I'm pretty high on
You're very high.
I'm keen to draft him.
Listen to that one. Check out the kicking numbers on the ultimate ranking spreadsheet as well. They're all in there. So you can use those to rank too.
Let's talk about the great man.
Oh, dear.
Thompson Dow, the brother of the great one, Paddy. Don't worry, there won't be a song about Thompson this year. We've already kind of snuck him into the last year's song. There is a couple of Thompson Dow.
You have to listen very closely, but Thompson is mentioned.
Much like Paddy, Thompson is a superstar of the competition, a future superstar of the competition.
Here we go.
No, I swear he will be. It's time for T-Dub's time to shine this year, 2022. So we've talked about their ageing midfield, who's going to step up. Trent Cotchin, 31, Dusty, 30, Prestia, 29. Shane Edwards actually had a big reasonable CBA usage last year. He's 33. They need some fresh meat at Punt Road, and the man to do that is Thompson Dow. So he split his time between AFL and VFL last year, and that's only his second year in the AFL. 21 disposals, 3 marks, 3 tackles, so a nice little spread in the VFL, but only 74 AFL fantasy points, but it's only his second year, so we'll cut him some slack. He did have some pretty good scores, though, in the twos. 112 and 92 were his best two. At AFL level, though, he's only got the 45 next to his name. Okay, so draft night, he's going very late. Nobody's going to be looking at Thompson Dow. He's only 20 years old. There's plenty of room in the midfield for him. Can actually win a contested pill. He had 10 in one of his games. I just think as a smoky, especially as a stash option, as we're talking, that it's only going to be a year or two before, the wheels kind of fall off and that turnover is going to happen.
Yeah.
And like Kay, as you said, there's a few vying for those spots, and I'm going to talk about probably one more next, but Thompson's in the mix, and if he's in the mix and this year he's got forward status, could he third year breakout? I know you're a big fan. Could he step up?
He's one that's kind of on my radar. Not as high on my radar as your radar. Probably we've got different brands of radar, but look, he's kind of a guy that in our home league, if we do rookies and stuff like that, and if he was around that kind of, where you even get an extra year out of him, or even your last pick, because I reckon I'm of a belief that I think Geelong and Richmond, this is going to be a real crunch time year for both of those sides in terms of they need to get wins early.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
both of them.
By around 12, by around 13, we could see some real flips and some retirements and stuff like that. So those kind of youngsters at Geelong and Richmond, I reckon, are nice to have on your side, especially if you're not playing waivers and stuff. Grab them late, because they might be bust, but at the same time, they might be massive booms where they can, they actually get a role and they can show their wares. So, guys like Dow, and I know the couple other guys you've got in the dock, I reckon I'm keen just to have a little bit of a nibble of them in some of my leagues this year.
Absolutely. If you got those rookie, I know a lot of leagues have those kind of rookie stashes or, rookie spots on their list where you can keep a couple of guys, the younger players, and like you said, Geelong as well. But Richmond is one that I'd be stashing a couple if you can, just to make sure you hit on one of them, because these guys are going to be the midfield, the future of the midfield. It's just a matter of who. I'll talk about the next guy though, who I probably think as being the one to step up. So I did mention Thompson, and it's good to mention him because he's got forward status. So if he does pop, he's probably the most valuable of this lot.
Yep.
But Jack Ross is the guy that I think is going to take that next step this year and be the one that gets the role. So I know Jack Graham is the guy that's 2G for P that could be the one as well, but he can also play that wing role. Jack Ross is the one that was kind of being nurtured at the end of the season to be the one, and by all reports having a cracking pre-season, as they all are at this time of year. But 21 years old, barely had a chance to get into that midfield due to the fact that, winning 3 premierships basically since he's been drafted. They've won a couple as well. But he's a bit of a state league beast this year anyway. 116 points per game for the VFL Tigers, 27 disposals, 9 marks, 4 tackles, only 3 games. But he can score using, a multitude of ways. So we like seeing marks and tackles as part of your score as well as big disposal numbers. So he can do that. Played 11 games at senior level 2 last year, and he sort of began showing those good signs late. So over his final 3 games, 21 disposals, 6 marks, 2 tackles, 79 fantasy points. But I reckon the best indicator was when in the last round, they just, they threw out basically the next wave. They dropped all their guns. There was no Dusty, no Prestia, no anyone, basically, okay? And Ross went in and was the highest centre bounce at 10D for that game, 79%. So that's a juicy number. 24 disposals, 11 contested touches, 5 marks, 4 tackles, 93 fantasy points. So if he goes in there, I know he was like a daily fantasy stud for a couple of weeks there because, you know that if he goes in there, he scores. I'm just hoping it's him, and I think it will be him that goes in there this year.
Oh, God, this makes it hard. He's another one that I've got that I'm planning on dropping at the moment. But, yeah, I've been hearing those reports, and it makes it... pretty hard. I don't know. I just can't. I'm just going to bring it back to the Richmond game style. Like, we just don't see midfielders score well in there. It all depends on whether we see a shift there, whether he's going to pop this year or not.
I think he can score if he's in there, but the reason, like you're saying, the reason he probably isn't in there is because he doesn't necessarily play that same style that they're after.
And even if he's
in there, he'll score.
If he, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. Like, we only saw him really score when he was like given basically the number 1 role in round 23 last year. That's the only time he's actually really like. I know, and then I think his first few early games, which were like maybe 3 or 4 years ago, he put up some decent numbers. I remember as well. Nothing huge, but like 70s and 80s and things like that from like 2 games. Like he's always been a player that's kind of piqued my interest, but it's just I just can't trust Richmond. That's my issue. It just comes back to that.
I've been tipping a Ross breakout for probably like 2 years now, and it's purely just because opportunity. So almost like the Jack Graham thing. Jack Graham's been a real tease for 2 or 3 years because you know what he can do, just hasn't had the opportunity. So I'm keen.
I always think of him. Do you guys think of him as like a smaller? I kind of thought he was like a
nuggety dude.
He's like 187 centimeters.
Yeah, that's average these days for an AFL player, though, isn't it? They're all 190 plus.
For some reason, I thought he was like a flat 180 or something. He's 6'1", or 6'2", whatever.
All right, is that it for Richmond, Dossie?
I had Sydney Stack as well, but I think I wrote about him and I'm like not that keen, but there's that opportunity we're talking about, he could either slot onto a wing or in the defensive line.
Or he doesn't play at all and goes missing.
Is he in the B2 too, guys?
Sydney Stack, he's in the emergencies. I'll double check. Yeah, he's emergency.
All right. Yeah. Cool. All right, let's wrap that one up, Kays. Let's move on to St Kilda, the team that you had a look at this week.
When the Saints were watching
Should we mention RCD quickly? Right. Does anyone think RCD is going to be the one that stands up? Rioli, Collier, Dawkins, because he was my special mention.
There's a chance.
Can be.
There's a chance.
He's another one of those stashes. I think the other guys are on top. I just want to mention because I know some people would have been keen to hear about him. But
all right, cool. Okay. Honourable mention to RCD. All right, let's move on to actual St Kilda now. I'm not going to play the intro again.
So. Do it again.
No, get into it.
I actually found a lot of guys, and kind of find it hard who to speak about from St Kilda, so I've got a bit of a mix here. I'm going to kick off with Jade Gresham. So he just sneaks into pod contention. Basically, after he had an injury, affected 17 points in his final game last year, round 3. But he was absolutely firing before that. He had 95 and 107 points in rounds 1 and 2, and going at a serious clip. The 95 came from only 67% time on ground, and the 107 from only 75% time on ground. So, absolutely, we started 2022 off flying before his Achilles snapped. Unfortunately. Sounds super painful.
Very much so, yes.
Oh, yeah.
But look, his last proper season, if you take away the COVID-affected 2020. In 2019, he averaged 83.4. Now, last year he went into the season without any forward status, was a mid only, so kind of dropped down a few people's rankings. However, the fantasy gods have given it back to Jade, and I think it probably helps him because coming off an injury like the Achilles, he's probably going to have to spend some more time up forward. So I'm kind of talking about Gresham more as a because he's not probably going to be delisted by anyone in a keeper league because he's a good quality player.
It's
and
where
he's
you're
a
going to
forward.
draft him.
This is where you're going to draft him from a startup. So I'm thinking because of the injury and because that the Saints midfield runs pretty deep, Steele, Crouch, Jones, Ross. Then if you want to go even deeper, like Hanbury can play, Burns, Higgins, Bytel, Hunter Clark's coming back. They've got lots of options. So they can actually afford to have Gresham have a bit of a buffer season up forward. So what I like about it is got the forward status this year, and while I think he'll become a midfielder, I think he's probably got another extra year up his sleeve because of that major injury. I think he can genuinely replicate what he did early last year because he's always been a highly, highly touted player. So I reckon he's a great get if he's starting up a keeper league because he'll be one who might just drop down some people's ranks just because of the diminished average a bit, and people may not be quite switched on. That forwards are pretty slim this year, but he's what I'm liking to take if in a startup because of that kind of 2-year buffer of forward status, and it's onward and upward from there.
I think the classic hype around Gresh actually hurts. Like there's a little bit of hype around Gresham coming back.
Underpriced.
Yeah. I think that'll hurt him being that sleeper kind of like option in your startups and stuff, but I really like him long term. I'm just so concerned with the Achilles injuries. Like,
how long did they take to come back from? Like, Butters had one last year, and he was nothing when he came back.
But Gresham's like snapped it.
Yeah,
and that's a year. That's a 12-month injury, and so he's obviously. They've already said that they're going to ease him back. So for this year alone, I reckon, like you said, they're going to ease him back into it.
Yeah.
Long term, I was so big on Gresham back in the day. He to me, and I've said it on multiple pods, including the pod tonight, but he reminds me of a Zorko type talent in terms of Zorko's just that small midfielder that can just. He's such a nightmare for the opposition because you can't get a body on him and he just, weasels around you and he's such a good clearance player. So long term, the Saints are so big on Gresh, but I just want to see how he comes back from this injury.
Yeah, so he's a player that you go after in keeper leagues as a forward, knowing that he's not going to probably score as well this year, but that when he goes back into that midfield, he's going to be a pretty
He's only
scorer.
24. Feels like he's been around a lot longer than that. So you're still going to get 5-6 great years out of him.
Cool. Gresh is a tick. Let's move on.
Tick. Brad Hill is the next guy I want to talk about.
I think we actually had a few questions in the chat about Brad Hill as well. Just wondering whether he will. This one is from. Can't actually read the screen up there.
Matt Roach. Will Brad Hill's scoring improve this season, especially now with Caulfield's injury?
So that's something
we're about to find out.
You could factor that in there, Case.
I have, but actually, I'm not even that interested with him taking Nick Caulfield's role. I've got a few guys I want to talk about in that aspect, but. He's gone from pure mid to pure back, just off the back of a few games last year. Now, fair to say he hasn't necessarily set the world on fire since crossing over to the Saints, especially fantasy-wise. But I reckon as a defender, he becomes quite relevant again. Averaged 71.2 last year. And on that number, he's just outside the top 50 defenders for last year. So he's still around the mark. Obviously, as a mid-only, basically untouchable. Getting defender status makes him very much in the frame for coaches. If you look back in 2019, he played 22 games and averaged 88.7. And is it kind of crazy to think that he could get back to that one day at the Saints? Look, he didn't miss a game last year. Managed to pick up 3 tons. He did have a few stinkers. Had 4 games under 50. Including a 6 disposal, 24-point game against North of like 85% time on ground or something, which is filthy. But look, I've got him on the wing in my Saints best 22. We know he's a great outside player, and the Saints play a lot of games at Marvel, so that probably plays into his abilities. Just nice shot roof, can get it on the outside nice and easily. Now
it might be COVID friendly. It might be open.
Well, on the wings it will still be covered up, so just in the middle that will be wet. Yeah. What does it say? But yeah, look, I think maybe now he's a bit more settled in that Saints side. 3rd year at the club, basically a 3rd year breakout again. But could we see some Brad Hill of old is the question. But I'd be more than happy to take a punt on him as my D5 because that's what he probably sits at. But he's one who could probably sneak up to D4, D3 if he gets back to some, old school Freo numbers.
Sorry, can I just make this clear? Does 3rd year breakouts like they start again, like when you go to a new club, right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Just factor that in. Brad Hill. I don't know. I feel like if we were going to see anything from him, we would anything of value, we would have seen it last season moving into defence. I know you've got him on the wing. listed as offender. I can't even see him getting that much. I don't know. I really don't know with Brackett.
The thing that I liked about him moving, like if you're saying he's moving back on the wing, I'm not as keen. Obviously, he did have that history of scoring, but he averaged 26% of the team's kick-ins after round 14, which I put out a little kind of article a little while ago looking at kick-in upside. So he basically started taking it from Dougal Howard. So Dougal had basically a crap load of kick-ins, but he only had 3% in the final 3 games of the year, and he had a seasonal average of 45%, whereas kind of Hill was taking that bulk at the end of the season. So it was like, yeah, basically just I'd be interested in him if he's actually playing in defence. So you think he's going to just move up on the wing, in which case I'm probably not that keen.
Because I'll run you through, this will lead into the next 2 guys. So my back 6 for St Kilda are Jack Sinclair, Dougal Howard, Tom Highmore. With Caulfield's injury, I think Ben Patton slides back in there. Callum Wilkie,
Ben Patton,
and Hunter Clark. So Hunter Clark's got to come back into that side too. I doubt that he's going to go into the midfield straight away. Is he?
Potentially.
I hope so.
Potentially.
I don't know. They've got so many midfielders, and they've actually got so many halfback flankers as well. Like you could even whack in who's missing out in that side. Like not sexy names, but Jaron Geary, Jimmy Webster, Josh Battle can play back there. There's plenty of guys who can play defence. And
say Josh Battle again. I want Josh Battle this year.
Well, yeah,
everyone wants Josh Battle. Kaz, you've been bidding Josh Battle for a while.
I'm off him.
I know you are now. The thing is with Caulfield, like he was barely even a best 22 at the end of last year. Like
that's an absolute fabrication of the truth.
He was out of the side. He got dropped for a good few rounds. He was the sub for a few games. He wasn't in there for a while, and he wasn't scoring very well. Side
and he wasn't scoring well doesn't mean he was not best 22.
Well, either way, like all right, someone else was just going to come in. Like he was good the year before. But then we saw Sinclair move back there and kind of play the juicy role.
Sinclair killed him.
So, even does Nick Caulfield going out really benefit anyone?
Well, give someone a game.
Yeah, I guess, but still. We'll talk about Highmore next, which is probably the guy
Tommy
who's going to
Highmore
take
is the guy who I kind of have as the big winner from Nick Caulfield's injury. So Highmore is 23, 193 centimetres and that natural intercept defender. When Caulfield was at his best 2 years ago, he was intercepting a lot because he's about 190 or high 180s. So he's that hybrid kind of type player too. So I had Highmore around the mark for a best 22 spot, but I think without Caulfield, he just kind of jumps into that kind of role.
Caulfield was dropped twice, omitted twice.
Still played 16 games.
Yeah, out of 23 or 22. That's
a lot of games.
That's not best 22 for a fair chunk of it.
He finished the year.
Yeah, I know, but I'm saying that's a fair chunk of the game, that fair chunk of the season where you're not best 22.
It's not really, but anyway.
6 games is a lot.
If you're supposedly, and he wasn't injured for any of them?
If you're supposedly, I don't think so.
Okay, we'll just double check that before you throw out crazy calls.
16 games, that's a lot of games to play.
What he played the year before, he would have played close to 22. And then he could there's
16 games that somebody else is going to be in that role next year.
I'm just saying that he's like Nick Caulfield was dropped twice, therefore he was on the verge of not being best 22.
Don't worry about it, Doss. He's got a chip on his shoulder because he's a Nick Caulfield owner and now he's bitter and twisted.
Sorry, I think best 22, the guy that plays every week, every round without getting dropped. That's the kind of what I'm looking at.
I don't know if that works in any football side.
It does. Like if you're first picked or you're actually on the team sheet when you're fit and available, you're best 22.
He played the last 3 games, therefore he's best 22.
Okay. When the season was over. But anyway.
Anywho, I'm talking about Tom Highmore. Stop being bitter and twisted. So, Tommy Highmore, 12 games last year, averaged 61.2, average around that 14 touch, 5 marks a game. Now, he had 22 touches and 110 points against the Crows, but in that game, he also had a whopping 13 marks. So, as I was saying before, Caulfield was his best when he was being able to play that natural interceptor role and had a bit of flair. Jack Sinclair going back there basically ruined that for him, but I like a bit of a 2-prong attack to replace what Caulfield can do or the person that could Caulfield be, is that I think that Tom Highmore can play that intercept marker kind of role really well, but not necessarily that running creative role because I think that's Jack Sinclair's from now on in. So going back on that back 6, I just think Highmore's that natural third tall interceptor role and a guy who can average probably that mid-70s this year because he's got a bit of flair too. So
2 games I like in the VFL for Tom Highmore, 110 average. So
yeah, I don't know. I just don't know if I see anyone benefiting from a fantasy point of view coming in. But Tom Highmore does have the potential. I think if someone's going to step into Caulfield's role, we play 16 games that Caulfield play, I reckon he's the next one that actually goes in there. I just don't know whether I see it being a fantasy friendly role. That's all.
Well, it might help because Ben Patton's also going to play back there, and another one who's going to benefit from his injury purely because he's probably now going to work his way in the best 22. Now, I like Ben Patton. For listeners who've been around a while, I'm a bit of a fan. I don't know if he's on the bus anymore. I might have dropped him off last year, but I was backing him in nicely.
Injured, you've dropped him.
He snapped his leg in half last preseason, man. That's brutal. But he did get back in the training.
The hospital on the way, or what? They just kick him out on the side of the road.
Of course we did.
Okay,
of course we did. We made sure he had a private hospital. Good stay there.
Yeah, we paid for the TV, did you?
Got Uber Eats in every day for him. No, don't
Making
think sure. Crappy hot. Jeez.
Anyway, move on.
I'd hate to see how you treat your boys like Nick Caulfield.
Oh, just the way you say he's on the bus after he got injured, I thought it was a bit mean.
You can't have an injured player on your bus.
I'd drive him home, nurse him back to health myself, to be honest. Anyway,
poor Nick Caulfield misses 6 games and he's been run over twice by Hev.
Didn't get injured.
God help me. I hate to be on your bus or your station wagon.
Move on.
But back training in August, so he's going to be ready to go come round 1. Now, not the sexiest numbers here. He averaged 59.5 in 2019 and a BCV 64.5 in 2020, but was looking really good for a nice 2021. The issue is, I think, his injury opened up that door for kind of Sinclair to go back there. And Patton's a bit more of a lockdown style defender, so I kind of have him as a Blake Hardwick of a few years ago. So a guy who can score pretty well, pretty consistent, but is more focused on kind of taking the man as opposed to free running kind of attacking defender. Now, what am I going to say? Look, I just think that Patton can go in there. He's going to be the guy who plays that defensive role that every kind of team needs in their defense.
So basically, Patton's going to come in, take someone's man, and Highmore's going to score.
Correct.
So Patton's irrelevant.
No, Patton's going to be
He's
fine.
off your bus.
No, Patton's like...
This reminds me of Kay's Tim English call last year where Steph and Martin, they're going to basically stand next to each other. Steph Martin take the ruck taps and then Tim English run around and get the kicks.
It did kind of work because Tim English didn't take too many ruck taps in the end.
No, he played it forward like everyone predicted, but anyway.
I'm happy to back in that Patton's best 22. I think he's good. I don't have a good consistent pick. So if you just need someone who's some defensive cover, I think he can be that kind of 65-ish. I know that's not great, but just don't write him off. I think they get 2-prong attack, helps out Tom Highmore, and Hef can still be bitter and twisted about.
Sign me up.
He's a fine filler for your bench. Like, you're going to need players like Ben Patton that'll play most weeks and score okay. He's fine.
I don't know why everyone hates me on my calls so much. It's just
I think the trouble is St Kilda trying to find good players in there, mate. That's the issue.
St Kilda have a lot of good players.
Oh, why'd you pick some? No, I was kidding.
Who would you like me to talk about? Like Dan Hanbury? Oh, I don't know. 40 and shit.
I don't know. Yeah, anyway, move on.
Ryan Burns. Is he good enough to talk about?
Yes, this is the good one.
Right, so he had an eye-catching year last year. Average 63. He played 16 games. Is that an acceptable season or not an acceptable season, Hef? 16 games.
As he wasn't best 22 for a lot of them is my point. But yes, he got into the best 22 at some stage, yes.
Hey, so some people can be Ets are up.
No.
Anyway, Burns
do you actually want me to repeat myself? Or?
He got in from round 7 and wasn't dropped since. Yes, so that makes him best 22.
Yes, in the end.
Now, his best game of the season came against the Dogs, registered 24 touches, 12 marks and 107 points. Now, it's probably worth noting that Burns averaged around that 15 touch mark last year, and the 3 games that he cracked 70 points, he had over 7 marks in those games. Now, I'm a big fan of Burns, but I can't rely on someone like him of his stature. He's only about 180 centimetres, needing big mark games for big scores. So the other thing is he doesn't actually tackle a lot. He only had 4+ tackles on 2 occasions. So he just needs to work into that midfield, find a bit more of the footy, and then he'd be a bit more reliable. He is trending nicely, coming into his 3rd year breakout season, and does have that juicy forward status. So I do like to say, if you've got that juicy forward status, he's a basically free swing, 3rd year forward status, free swing. But I think he's probably going to be one who will evolve better in 2023 as opposed to 2022. Saints midfield's still got a fair bit of talent running around it. But yeah, he's one who's still building. What's it called? Just what's your expectations this year? I think.
I know you got a bit of a crush on him. Go, mate.
Oh yeah,
go, mate.
I mean, the thing is, I think it was Louis on the pod last year. I think
2020 it was.
Yeah,
COVID year.
He kind of let me know about him, and he was big on him as a junior. I think it was fantasy scorer. He's been a kind of scorer like his whole kind of career.
Louis actually predicted his debut that week as well.
Yeah, he did.
Like, he was on top of it,
and I've had a man crush ever since. Honestly, he's. I love the way he goes about it. The way that he has that thirst. Now, I don't know if the Keeper League listeners know too much about the thirst concept.
They might. Tell them about it.
His desire for the footy, you can just see it in his eyes, okay? There's a difference between someone that the ball falls in their lap, like an Andy McGrath. You have to make him want the footy. Whereas Ryan Burns, you can see in his eyes, he's just got that thirst. He's drooling for the footy. He wants the Sharon in his hands. The desire is just off the charts. And Ryan Burns has that.
If he's thirsty, shouldn't he be getting more than 15 touches?
He's still developing.
It's an opportunity. So low time on ground, not getting many centre bounces. At VFL level, 92 average last year. But the thing is that you said about his marking's actually what I really like about him. So he's not in a role where he can really tackle, which I believe he can do when he gets in there. His marking uncontested is where I really like him. So he actually played that kind of high half forward role where he gets into stoppages.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like what we saw Caldwell play at the end of last year. I'm really high on Burns this year because I think he'll play that sort of high half forward and rotate into the centre bounces as well.
It's generally a good sign when they are getting that high half forward role because then that's the way they rotate them into the stoppages and it's usually a transition into the midfield. So it's generally a good sign when that happens. I think there's plenty of upside. I know the fantasy scoring probably didn't come last year, but the things I've seen, and then there was a few decent games in there. The things I've seen, I think there's plenty of potential here for sure.
A few decent games. He had 2 70s and 100.
There you go.
100.
Yeah. That's good. That's a few decent games.
I'm just saying I like him. I'm just not predicting a 2022 breakout. I think he's got one more year of serviceable scoring.
Also, I believe it was top 3 in the time trial, which is very important.
Guaranteed gun.
That'll get you written
let's
about
get through this last one.
AFL.com.au. Last player for me is Jack Higgins. So pleasing end to 2021 for little Snags. He's kind of got back into my sights this year. So slowish start to the season. He ended up averaging 76 from round 11 onwards, which kind of shows me where his floor probably should be. Had 116 points against the Swans in that infamous Missy Higgins game where he kicked 1 goal 6, but he hit the scoreboard 7 times, which is very important. But he also collected 23 touches that day, so actually starts to find the footy. Backed it up the week after with 103 against the Crows. And from that, he's always really struggled with a bad floor, but after that he didn't drop below 50, which is probably not too bad considering he kind of plays a weird hybrid half-forward kind of role. But I've said it once and I'll say it a million times. I'm actually sure why he went to St Kilda. I think it was the stupidest decision for his career because he should be a much better midfielder or mid-forward. But he's still working his way into the AFL and he's chosen Saints. But he's still only 22. Feels like he's been around a long time too. Won the flag and stuff like that. But there's plenty of upside, I think. So towards the end of the season, he was playing a lot higher up the ground in that high half-forward role. And I think if that continues this year, it's going to be a lot better than his 69 average probably suggests. Will he ever be that pig that people were predicting?
No.
If you were like, he's the next, No,
I was not keen on him at all. Like junior numbers I was, but as soon as I saw the size of the guy, I'm like, there's no way this guy's playing bulk midfield.
But I just don't know what I don't know what he's going to be in his career. I think he's just going to be a half-forward flanker. That's the issue. But I think he's going to get to a point where he's going to have a really nice floor, maybe not a massive ceiling, but could be a guy who's he's 75, 80 average forward, who have a little run in the guts every week. Not someone I'd hold, but someone I'd be keen to take a punt on in the draft and a redraft early-ish.
I just can't believe last year as soon as Gresham went down, I was like, this is the time. Like we're talking about smaller players, Gresham, that sort of pocket rocket, same sort of deal. I was like, we're finally going to see Higgins play midfield. 2% of centre bounces for the year. Last year was the year if he was going to play midfield. It's so disappointing.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, like, again, I think he's just another one of those. Maybe because the forward's a bit more scarce, he probably becomes a bit more relevant. Yeah. So one of your later forward picks. F5, I'd be happy to have him there if I had to, preferably on the bench. But another kind of a pick that you need to factor into your keep league teams anyway.
Yeah, it's a tough one with St Kilda's best 22s and stuff. Like, there's a lot of, not similar players, but a lot of guys who are like, they're okay, but they're not great players and they're not horrible players. They're okay players.
At least he's fun to watch if you're an owner. So that's one thing
that's
you can factor in. You can, at least you're not going to
You can cheer on every kick and things like
play.
that. Yeah. Hopefully he kicks a bicycle kick goal like he did that year and then get around that. Anyways, very tough teams tonight to actually find some gold, but we got through it in the end and hopefully found something for you there. But if you want to support the podcast and you enjoy listening to it each week, please sign up as a member. We mentioned the ranking spreadsheet that came out this week. That's been going bananas. People have been frothing at the bit to get to that. So has your player averages, averages from last year, has ages, CBAs, kick-ins, points per minutes, time on ground. It's the best ranking spreadsheet you'll find on the internet. We're putting out our ruck rankings tomorrow with a podcast that somehow we managed to talk for half an hour about our top 20 rucks. So there's some good insight in there. We've also got the draftee fantasy scores, state league fantasy scores, breakout tracker, lots of stuff on there as a member. Each week we thank our 10 gold members. We're up to 500 members this week, by the way, so over 500. So that is huge. So thank you to everyone who's signed up. Who wants to volunteer to read the gold members this week?
I can do it.
You've got a case. On your case.
Right, yeah, we'll start off with Tonsi Mardasek, Crunchy Cron, Stefan Huisenoff, James Elms, Matt Roach, Damien Clemens, Adam Warney-Child, Lorenzo Fokker, Brendan Scanlon, and Henry McIntosh.
Some big names in there. James Elms. No, Warney signing up. That's a big rap on us. The GOAT of fantasy football podcasting. He's a member of the Keep League podcast. So if it's what's good for the goose, they say, it's good for the gander.
Crunchy. Is that how you pronounce it? I wonder if that's Crunchy.
Yeah, that's a Scandinavian name, I think. Yeah, traditional. Yeah. Anyway, we actually got a podcast review this week on Apple, but before we read that one out, just remember to rate us on Spotify. We're up to 4.9 again. I think we've got about 50 odd ratings on there now, so we're climbing up again. Someone must have
got it back to a respectable number after Doss was here last week.
Someone must have given it a 1 in there, so yeah, maybe that just what pumped it up. But anyway, this is from Kang Daddy. He said, "These stallions deep dive into the lesser knowns, which has helped me win my keeper leagues and even handy for deeper single season draft leagues. Just as important is the podcast is their gold membership, dirt cheap for a bunch of extra content through the site. But to me, the best part is the legends you meet and learn off in the Facebook group, which is worth the membership price alone. Keep up the good work, boys."
Jeez, how much you pay that person to put that one in there?
I swear that was I found that on Apple Podcasts this week. So yeah, great review. Thank you for that one, Kang Daddy. Let's move on to some listener questions. All right, on to the listener questions. Nicholas Ben asks, how high up the forward rankings should I have Jack Graham? Kays, you wrote an article on him today, so I'm going to throw this one to you. How high?
He's a top 10 forward.
Top 10?
Yep.
You were saying top 5 earlier.
Could be top 5.
Okay.
Look, if he averages, I've got him averaging 90 this year, and based on last year's averages and the people that are available as forwards this year, they would have him as the 4th highest forward.
Yep, no, fair enough.
I don't think it's that unreasonable. Like Taranto, Duncan, Dunkley, Marshall, maybe side bottom around that mark. But I'm picking some big things for Jack Graham this year, so I reckon he could be easily top 5, easily top 10, if not top 5.
If he continues on from last year, it could be right.
We just talked about the 3 guys that could potentially take the role, and all of them we're kind of like, are they ready to go? Whereas Graham's ready
the one that's ready to go. Yep.
Dale Paul Travers wants to know, with Port's young brigade starting to get more time in the mids, will Houston go back and just stay a defender? He seems to score better in that role, Hef.
So I think I did some numbers. I should have actually put the actual numbers, but his CBA attendance, the games where he attended CBAs weren't that high last year, but I did crunch some numbers. So I did an average of game where he actually attended CBAs compared to games where he went without CBAs. So in games with CBAs, he averaged 79.8. Okay. Games without CBAs, he averaged 80.2. So he's slightly better without CBAs. There is an outlier in there. There was one injury game where he got some CBAs, injury affected games. So that bumped him down a little bit, but it would be pretty even still with or without CBAs. Average of games with 5 or more CBAs, he actually averaged 75.2. So in games where he had 5 or more CBAs, he didn't go very well. But in games where he had 10 or more, he averaged 118.5. This is only 2 games. So he actually averaged 5 CBAs per game. Actually, no, that's wrong. That's the Carl Lamont stat I looked up from our argument on the members only podcast the other week. I don't know if it was 5. But the point is, if he gets 10 or more CBAs, which is full-time mid, he'll go big. He's not going to be, very rarely is he full-time midfield. He's generally in and out. And I think it kind of messes with his game going in and out of the midfield onto the half-back line. So I think they'll kind of roll with him as a half-back flanker, but I don't think it's going to affect his scoring too much. He's just going to be your lock and load 80 type defender. I think that's what it is.
He's going to be talked about on this podcast for many a year.
Yeah.
Because, I don't
up and around the...
Unsure whether he's
B2B, 2G, 4P, around that kind of range.
We talked about him on the defender podcast, and we both I think we all agreed that he's just like he's a safe option.
Yeah.
Who's
Yeah.
never going to set the world on fire, but he's never
We'll
going
get
to
80 every
disappoint
year.
you.
Yeah.
And he's just that guy.
Yep. Cool.
Ninja Spoon, who benefits in Saints' defence with Nick Coffield going down. What's your final verdict, Case?
Fantasy wise, Tom Heimel.
Yeah, I'm with Highmore.
All right, Jakey the Mac. If you could only keep one, DBJ or Burton or neither. They're fighting out for his last keeper spot along with Trent Rivers. His team's looking to push for finals after 2 down years. Cheers, legends.
Dossie, you would go Trent Rivers hands down, wouldn't you, out of those 3?
Based
you
on... Wait, so what did he say? His team's looking to push for finals.
DBJ, Ryan Burton,
I'd
or
go Burton.
That's what
Yeah.
I'd go to.
Kicking
the way
numbers.
and the way he finished last year, of course, he run that injury risk. But Port have said they've stopped managing him and they're just kind of playing him as it normally would be and just waiting. If he gets injured, he gets injured. But they're just going to play him like they run him, condition him the way they condition any other player because they reckon everything they do just doesn't work with his injury. So
Only
they're just gonna run him as hard as
because
they
you
can.
said he's competing. Like Trent Rivers
Yeah.
is the long-term option.
Burton's end to last year was big as well. So yeah, I think Burton. Cool. I thought that's cool. I was going to say Burton, but I thought you guys would be different. But anyway, that's good.
At Takanen Troy, probably butchering names like I got called out for butchering someone's name the other week, but which young midfielders improves the most for Richmond? So I've had the go, but what do you guys think?
Yeah, like we're not including Jack Graham, so it has to be one of those young ones. I think Jack Ross, yeah.
So it's probably just out of Jack Ross, RCD and Thompson Dow, right?
Yeah.
Jack Ross to me. I think Liam Baker's a crazy sneaky to just be injected in there.
I'd love it if he is. If it's
Like
him.
I just, Dimmer could throw up something, and I reckon he's just that one who's just a little bit left field who could.
Yeah, so say in your best 22, they put Sydney Stack on a halfback flank and he slots in the guts.
Is that your smooth ball call there, Kaz? Your Manscaped smooth ball call?
Quite possibly.
Okay.
My smooth ball call can be,
All
yeah.
right.
Liam Baker gets more midfield time in 2022.
There we go.
At Nick McClay?
Nick McGawley.
McGawley, sorry, Nick. What averages can we expect from Riley Bonner and Jack Bytel?
I think Bonner's just going to be a 70 guy. Like I don't expect too much more. There was a bit of play on the wing for him last year. Then I think he did a hamstring really early. Was it calf or something? And he put up some okay numbers, but when he's best 22, he'll be mid 70s. If he has everything goes to plan for him, he may average an 80 one day, but I just see a mid 70s average for him. Bytel, I think, improves a little bit this year, but I probably wouldn't see much more than a 70 next season either. What do you guys reckon?
124 average in the VFL for Bytel off his 2 games.
Big
I don't know if he plays.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The thing is, playing's all right. You can say not best 22, but there will be times when there's injuries and stuff where you could get opportunities. So when he does play, do you think he can translate that to AFL level?
He probably was competing most for a spot with Dunstan.
That was my
He played
thinking.
13 games
It's the
last year,
ta-
which
it's
is
that
almost a Nick
tackling-
Caulfield year.
Yeah.
Like,
he was the high.
So would you
whenever
say
he
he's
played-
best 22 player?
no.
Yeah, exactly.
You
That's
need
my
to play
point.
16 to be best 22.
That's the line, is it?
Problem is, he's actually a really strong tackler. I might have to change my ranks a bit here for Bytel.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. He had 5 games under 40% time on ground, so sub a lot.
Yeah,
Jack
so
Bytel.
Dunstan gone. Hello, Bytel.
Maybe, yeah. I can see him improving. I just don't know. I don't know how much.
You got
It's
to
too hard to tell.
As I said, it's
Yeah.
hard to do best 22 for St Kilda because there's a lot of guys
Yeah.
you could throw in.
Absolutely.
I think I've got Burns over them. You've still got to play your boring, kind
Yeah,
of defender
correct.
guys. It's hard.
All right, let's move on. Last one. At Woody J64 have joined a startup dynasty league. 12 teams, 45 in squad, 35 to 40 keepers. Where do you Where do you start picking the new draftees? Dacos, Horn Francis, etc. Kays, what's your philosophy on this?
Don't even think about trying to rank them into something like that because someone's going to go earlier than you expect them to.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like in the perfect world, if you were doing something like that, they'd probably be maybe round 10, round 12.
Yeah.
Because
I'd go later, to be honest.
yeah, but that's being bullish on them,
Yeah, yeah.
right? But someone's going to take them round 2
Yeah,
or
someone's gonna
round
go early
4
on them,
or someone's
for
going to
sure.
be like, nah, I'm going to have the next big thing.
Dossie will have him by
Absolutely. Horn Francis. No, sorry. It was Ugo Hagen. Sorry, was the guy you took first round. Was it last year?
But even if you
Yeah.
look at someone, but then you go and it's really hard because if you say 3 years ago, the question would have been the exact same thing with Matt Rao.
Yeah.
And you go, where would you take Matt Rao? And everyone would be like, oh, he's the next best thing. He's the greatest thing
When
ever.
I was doing the Traders podcast, they were asking me first round, second round. I'm like, no, not at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's quite easy to see how quickly things can change. Like, yes, he's probably going to be a great player, but he hasn't played footy for 2 years. So you've taken a guy ahead of probably Jack Steele, ahead of, all these other guys who are now killing it, and he hasn't played for footy for 2 years. So
the thing that I go off, which I did in my ranks, is like when you're doing, say, your midfield ranks using your beautiful spreadsheet here, Hef. I just put the guys that you're super comfortable that are going to be guns for the next 2 to 3 years at least, and this is like your set and forget guns in the midfield, and then as soon as you lack slight bit of confidence with the next pick, that's where you slot in this next gun that could be the next Sam Walsh type thing, like a Dacos. Like, you just put them in your ranks where you're like, ugh, could I really draft this guy as my uber premium? That's what I'd just be like, yeah, Dacos.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know. I find it way easier to project what's going to happen this year as opposed to in 3 years' time. And I know it's a keeper league, but so that's why I'll project. All right, I can see someone like Dacos maybe in Horn Francis maybe averaging 80 this year. So I'd rather just go with someone more established later on. Look, if they're there in like here when you're rounding out your team, you can pick them as like an M6 or an M7. Then take them there. But they're never ever going to be there. So that's the ideal place for them for me. And so I just let them go. I just don't bother with them.
Dossie's trying to find that 115, that next 120 average.
Yeah, you'll get it in 5 years' time, and you finish bottom 100 times between now and then.
So, I'll get it 1 year,
and you'll be picking them every year and waiting for the next one. But anyway, that's the end of the podcast. An absolute monster pod tonight. So it went on for a bit, but that's the quality of content and the depth we go into each week. So get around us on our socials at Keeper League Pod on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Also on TikTok as well. Get around Manscaped as well. Thanks to them for sponsoring the show. If you support our sponsors, you support us. So make sure you use Keeper20 at manscaped.com and get around all those great products, especially that ball deodorant and toner. Quality stuff there. Anyway.
Loving the shirt tonight too, mate.
Yeah, I've got the Manscaped shirt on for those not watching the stream as well. Anyway, any last words from
he's cutting
you
the
two
sleeves
guys?
up a bit too.
No,
yeah,
regulation size, same size as yours, Kaz.
Well, he did order the little size down,
yeah, extra small.
Yeah,
no, it's a medium, same as yours, Kaz. Anyway, we'll wrap it up there. It's getting silly now. We'll talk to you next week. See you later.
Bye.